Hello and welcome to Scholar Spotlight with GPNG. We are so excited to have this initiative going that lets us highlight and discuss a little more in depth some really great work that's being done by early career scholars. Today we have Mariah Loukou, who is here to talk about her groundbreaking work in critical military studies, specifically around the role of women in active duty and combat units. And I will let her sort of discuss a little bit more, but if you wanted to get the short version, right, the Cliff Notes version, you can see her initial interview on our website. So, all right, give me the elevator pitch about your research.
Oh, and thank you so much for having me today. So the elevator pitch be, I am looking at the US military and specifically on whether a separate training and educational system designed just for women, female soldiers would add value to the US military as a whole, and specifically into the process of recruiting and training officers, and whether that would also advance the sort of women and female soldiers to higher ranks.
Interesting and very timely, right? Big questions
Indeed.
about how we bring together, a spectrum of genders in the military and how we sort of advance our troops into the 21st century beyond sort of this World War II era idea of how things should go. So does your work look more specifically at educational programs that are segregated, right? That are gender specific, like that you would have only women being trained, or are they more sort of co-educational and that we should change our training for everyone?
That's a great question. I think so. What I'm trying to do is look at the actually Jegertroppen, which is the all-female special forces unit in Norway, and it seems that it's kind of the first all-female special forces. And I'm kind of looking at that model to see how it works. So the way they've done it is that they kind of train women at the very beginning, and it's just them, and then later on it's a more mixed training. But that initial separation, I would say, from other troops and giving them that advancement, then makes it easier for them to be incorporated into and be more effective into their work. So having said that, there is a lot more research that I will be doing. So I don't want to to say this in kind of set in stone, but this is kind of the idea.
Interesting, very interesting. What and I know that this isn't necessarily the exact focus, but what's an advantage of having an all-female special forces unit, right? We think of this as being a very butch, door-kicking kind of situation, but presumably there are some real advantages to having gender parity or sole gender units.
I think that kind of came out from the Afghanistan and Iraq war, where the soldiers had to go in and they couldn't interact with the female population or with children because of the cultural barriers, and that idea came out from that sort of that challenge. But then, of course, there were a lot of groups that they were there to support the military and specifically the US military. However, they weren't really kind of recognized as special forces or as combat units, although they were just support units. But technically speaking, they were doing exactly the same things, not exactly, but they were kind of doing the same. They were in a line of fire as their male counterparts, and basically the advantage of having the female unit, it would be that they bring a different set of skills, more perhaps more empathy in the way they operate and the way they approach the battle, and at the same time having the same set of skills. So in a way, it's kind of like train them well and give them that opportunity to yeah, trained well, but also they bring that different skills that perhaps they weren't part of the military for a long time.
Right, right. So it's there is a gap here, right? There's an operational gap that like is getting filled, but rather than having it being filled sort of intentionally, it's kind of like, well, we're stopgapping. We're hoping that the people that we throw into the situation can rise to the occasion. But wouldn't they be much more effective if we actually gave them the correct training and the correct the appropriate right recognition and ranking and all of that. Were those the lioness units in Afghanistan?
Yes, so that was one of the most popular units, and I think there was a documentary around that specific unit. Very very interesting, and I remember seeing some of the scenes of the documentary. And basically, I think they were really inspirational. That specific unit was really inspirational for me because at the end of the day, hopefully, what I'm trying to achieve through my research is doesn't really matter if they are female or male. Units, at the end of the day, if they are capable individuals who can get the job done, hopefully gender will become irrelevant in that sense.
Mm.
Of course, they do have advantages because of their gender when you put it into cultural context. But in terms of training, recruiting, and just having capable individuals, having a protected characteristic should not be part of a limitation.
Right, right. That's I've now outed myself as a documentary film watcher, I guess. Um, yes, but I think your perspective on that is really valuable, and it segues very nicely into my next question about like what motivated you to pursue a PhD and this research career. Like why are you here? How come?
It's so interesting because I do not have any military connections. I think people assume that, my family has been in the military. Not at all. I think I did my master's in intelligence international security
Hmm.
at King's College London, and that degree opened up a new world. So this is where I kind of really learned about, Secret Service and about the military and about war and operations, and that sort of started there.
Mhm.
And I saw a gap and I saw an opportunity, and all of a sudden we were talking about war and Secret Service, and I couldn't see women anywhere. And the first thing I thought, I was like, why does it matter so much? Like, why do people have such an issue? If you are trained correctly, you should be able to do anything in a way. So that really motivated me to start my research.
Hmm. What advice would you give other people who are sort of were in your shoes, right? Master's students who are maybe thinking about going on to a PhD and seeing sort of the world open up or these questions open up that maybe they haven't had, personal family experience or what have you before.
Yeah, I would say check your motivation for sure, because it was really difficult to start my research. It took me 2 years to find a willing soul soul to support the idea I had. Just make sure you know why you're doing it. Why do you think they can you stay with the idea that you have for 4 years, um, and just make sure it's not just because it sounds fancy, I would say.
That is definitely a challenge, right? Of that there are so many topics that are sexy in the moment, that like somehow they're at the top of the news, and you see a lot of PhD um, sort of people who are applying for PhDs interested in doing something related to that. And it's 5 years, it's 10 years, it might be, a huge chunk of your career. So got to make sure it's not a question that you're going to be sick of in, a couple of years. Um, so we've talked a little bit about, you found the gap, right? Like you're seeing this question. Why have you been interested for 5 years? What is the thing that keeps pulling you back in?
It's a great question. It's There's so many things that are coming up there, and also I think it's the field of critical military studies. It's an emerging field,
Mhm.
and it's still growing, and that means that there are new ideas that I discover every day. And there's so many things to explore. So I think that's the thing that really keeps me going.
Right. It's new every day. Um,
Exactly.
so talk to me. If I would imagine being in a new field, there are some real challenges because you are breaking a new path, right? It's not necessarily something that you're dealing with established theories and sort of structures that are already in place. Lots of ways you're building as you fly. What are some specific challenges in doing your research?
So I would speak a little bit for the beginning and then a bit later. So I think at the very beginning was the doubt. So it was, I was hearing from academics that the competition is ruthless. You cannot make you will not be able to make it if you're a part-time PhD student. This is not a good enough academic field. So that was the biggest challenge, that I had that idea and I knew it was good, but there was a lot of resistance at the beginning. And I guess just having that, yeah, I would say just kind of believing that I was kind of thinking of something that made sense, made me continue. But yeah, it was a bit disheartening in the beginning just to hear people saying, "You're not gonna make it." But I think now, but I think now, kind of a bit later, and having being in this field for a while, I think it's just that you're trying to hopefully contribute something positive and hopefully help the military become more relevant or more advanced. But at the same time, there is that issue of militarization, right? And that you really try enable sort of militarization of women or female soldiers, and that's kind of an unintentional consequence. So you're trying hopefully to do some good research, but also that idea in the back of your mind that, am I doing is this the way to go? Is there something else I'm missing?
Right, right. Well, that's it's a real challenge, right, for thinking about our unintended consequences about how our research could be used, um,
Exactly.
without our sort of, you were aiming at something else and then it's been used in a different way. But even though you had sort of this real challenge at the beginning about, people not thinking that you had the right questions or that the competition was really fierce. I understand that you have some very recent good news that you just published with Marine Corps University, right?
Indeed, I published my first article with the Marine Corps University, and yeah, hopefully you can find out a little bit more about my ideas there.
Yeah, well, congratulations. That's a real
Thank
high
you.
watermark, in that when you get that first publication out and get that external validation about, no, I really do know what I'm talking about and I really am contributing to the literature more broadly. So congratulations. Um,
Thank you so much.
I mean, I think that sort of then ties into kind of this question about you talk about in the written scholar spotlight in sort of our conversation just now about your research is important because it has the potential to sort of change broader society, like, and to challenge these sort of gender constructs and constraints and things. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, why is it important to have gender equity?
Yes, I think it's kind of that idea that you're challenging the norm in a way that it's certain stereotypes and center that women cannot and shouldn't be in certain areas of life or society. And hopefully, I think also it's the military is the cornerstone of a state, of every state. And by making a difference within the structure of the military and showing that it's one of the toughest things you can do, right, being the special forces, being in an elite group. So I think by changing that norm there and allowing more women and showcasing the successes of more women, because there are women there changing things, but we don't see it as often. So I would think that would translate into society seeing women differently, respecting women more and their abilities. So I think, yeah, it kind of again brings kind of like shouldn't be an issue, starting with. So hopefully through that research that would come evident in other parts of society.
Right. Do you think that we necessarily need to be involved in active combat for the military to act as that sort of recalibration tool, or is it something that we can achieve through a peacetime military as well?
Interesting. I think we are very much sort of embedded into the peace process in a way, and I think part of that is they see women as the peacemakers.
Mhm.
And this is part of the traditional notion that women should be peaceful and sensitive. And it's, I think women are more easily perceived, part of that process. And of course there's so much more work that needs to be done, but I think the real challenge is when you see women in specialties and being in frontline just, you see the enemy face to face, and it's just a different type of skills.
Mhm.
That's why I feel that it's groundbreaking in that respect. But, again, very, very important to see women in peace building as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it certainly in the story of the United States and the military, right? That has been a major tool for um, particularly racial equity, right? And reducing discrimination and segregation and things and what have you. So it holds right that we would potentially see the same effect in gender if we are a little more intentional about it. Um, I mean, it feels like there's a great literature about challenging these ideas of women as inherent peacemakers, right? Um, it's not my exact area, but I'm interested in it in sort of a side piece. And I was so had to laugh when I saw we asked you what one of your favorite books was, where your favorite authors, right? And it's Dr. Enla, who is the sterling silver example, right, of sort of feminist security studies. Um, what specific influence do you think that she had on your academic career?
Oh my God, I can't even start to explain. um, I, genuinely, I just don't, I can't describe with words. I think it's just her ability to translate difficult concepts into sort of simple words that are so relevant.
Mm,
I think was the first part. And of course, through her publications and through her lectures online, I was able to learn so much and understand so much about feminist scholarship.
mhm,
And then I met her a couple of years ago in person. And she's a very accomplished academic, a very accomplished researcher, and she was like the nicest person I've met, and so easy to talk to. And she gave me so much wisdom in a few minutes, and I was like, that's, it gave me hope and it gave me faith that um, that we're doing something good here. So she's in the core of everything I'm doing for sure.
oh, I remember, I think I read Bananas, Beaches, and Bases in grad school. That's her first real big one, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just had that sort of like, oh my God, I hadn't even thought about these things together. It was a real sort of like this you have to sort of challenge all of these other assumptions and the things that you sort of all of the gravity that you thought existed, right? And it doesn't necessarily fit together. You really seemed like you enjoyed The Big Push. Why that book?
I think when I first read it and I came across the concept of sustainable patriarchy, I was like, that's brilliant. It was, she created a new concept, and again, a very complicated concept, but she explained it so well. And it's so fundamental to what we're doing.
Mhm,
And basically, it also explains a very complicated question.
mhm,
After all these years, we keep doing things, making sure that there is equality in society, and we're still struggling. We're still kind of seeing all the inequality happen every day. Why is that? And then Sydney, Dr. Enla, Professor Enla comes, and she's like, well, because there is something called sustainable patriarchy, and a concept that is um, so well established that becomes accepted by both men and women.
mhm.
And in a way, it's part of our life, and we don't really question things and the way they're done. So I was like, that's brilliant. That's the answer. So it really stayed with me. And I think, again, it kind of explains fundamental issues.
Mm. Well, and it seems like it connects very well into your work, right? In terms of we have assumptions about who fights and who makes peace, and the roles that women can have in the military of the very like logistics and support and all of these things that aren't actually violent, right? Even though they are exposed to the same level of violence and the same threats as their male counterparts, but somehow we have segmented them out differently. I mean, that seems like that fits beautifully with what you're doing.
Exactly. Yes.
So do you think that this kind of challenging of underlying structures is where sort of your research field is going to go in the future, or are there other questions really that you anticipate that the field will be exploring in the next 10 years?
I hope there will be new questions coming up. I think that's the exciting part because you just don't know what you're gonna discover. But I think hopefully sort of exploring those questions a bit more would be the next step for sure. But yeah, down the line, a few new questions hopefully will come up.
Right, right. If you could work on something else other than, kind of your current research agenda, which I know is all consuming, what else would you look at?
I think there could be so many sort of different ways it would, I'm currently talking about all female special forces units and how that would contribute and enhance the military agenda. But then it's also talking about what we really mean about advancing, like what does that mean, and modernizing the military. And that's a kind of a whole different area, talking about modernizing the military through the type of recruits that go into the military and into the different forces.
Mhm,
Um, Cybersecurity and drones is a fascinating field where we actually see women operating drones.
mhm,
And again, they are part of sort of attacking the enemy or killing the enemy, but it's behind a screen. And it would be really interesting to see how is this perceived
mhm.
differently than, combat roles, which is more direct. So perhaps contrasting those two ideas and why the results would be the same or different. So yeah, so many areas to explore.
Really, really delightful areas. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I know there's a big conversation happening now, having to do with sort of economic class, right? And who gets recruited into particularly the American military. And that rather than being a service experience that touches everyone, right? I forget, it's some horrifyingly small number, like 3% of the population has either served or it has, a family member who served. And that there are some real policy consequences, right, for having that kind of very small percentage of people who have a direct experience with the military. What are some of the other policy consequences of your work? How do you see that this connects for policymakers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it would be again sort of military policies would impact the equality, diversity, and inclusion policies in a way, and hopefully that would mean the processes would change as well. So I know where policies are very important, but I really think the processes that underpin and enable the policies are even more important. So um, yeah, I think that would be around equality and around the diversity of the group, and going back to my initial comment around recruitment, recruiting policies or training processes and the way you do these sort of things. I think that'd be the real impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I could also see that potentially it's going to change the nature of the conflict that you're in, depending on who you have on the front lines, right? Potentially, not necessarily, but it seems intuitive that if you have a more diverse career military officer corps, you start thinking about sort of long careers. Um, right now, that's looks very sort of traditional in a lot of militaries, right? And if you get a more diverse core, you might have different military policies, right? So there is might actually change the nature of how states uh, fight with each other.
Exactly. It's interesting you say that because the war the nature of war changes constantly. Uh, what we knew as World War One or two or Cold War, all these things are changing, and what we see today as war is different. But there's a lot of hesitation around the workforce and we employ to be part of those of that changing nature of war. So I think hopefully the in my opinion to really make a difference is through policies, but to be in that moment where we are changing the policies fundamentally, there need to be some evidence in a way, sort of that the groundwork that happens through critical military studies to actually say yes, we can change those policies because there is research to support that.
Right, right. We can think about things differently than we've always thought about them, you know, those kinds of
Exactly.
things. So I guess then the idea, right, is that you can't do this all by yourself. And for other, early career researchers or people who are thinking about going on to a PhD, who are interested potentially in critical military studies, or questions that are non-traditional, perhaps, and groundbreaking, what advice do you have for them?
Um, be creative. Don't be afraid to be creative, I would say, because that idea of being creative, it's just really fit into the academia world or in the traditional sense. So um, the sky's the limit. So feel free to just play with concepts and try new things. That would be my advice.
That's good advice. Are there any important relationships or resources that you found were very useful for you in kind of your early career position? I think you have a very unique perspective being a working PhD student, right? Of that you really had to balance a lot of things, and you're working on a difficult area, a new area. So anything that was just like, gosh, you absolutely have to get citation management software or find a group of people who all work on your same thing, or I don't know.
Um, Honestly, I would say I think find a community with like-minded people. That really makes a difference. And even if you don't talk to them every day, or you don't see them every day, it's okay. It really makes it easier. And I kind of talked about my early sort of challenge starting my PhD. But then I really found a small community of academics and other PhD students that were extremely supportive, and they were so ready to help with resources or to recommend very interesting seminar or whatever. So be part of a community.
Yeah,
That's
that
a good resource, I think.
I agree. I agree. I really, it can be such a lonely endeavor, writing a PhD, and um, kind of that stereotype of you're sitting in your basement writing alone, can turn into truth of real more quickly than you might like it to, right? And so having
Absolutely. But I think, yeah, it's so interesting. It's a lonely journey for sure, but also by having those interactions and having a cup of coffee, I mean, virtually now because that's not possible in
yeah,
real life. But even just having like 5 or 10 minutes conversation with someone really can spark something new. And then you can sit alone and write. But those 10 minutes could really make a difference.
yeah, I agree that when you're wrestling with a particular problem and having somebody else say, well, doesn't this sound like X, Y, and Z? And you're like, oh, it does. I've got a whole new lens on this now. I want to be sensitive of your schedule and your time, and I'm so appreciative of you taking the time to do this Scholar Spotlight. I loved hearing about your work. I'm obviously very much looking forward to your next publication, and think that what you're doing is critically important and will be shaping, right, how we fight wars, how we think about conflict, and how we think about the military in the next 50 years. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for inviting me. It's great talking to you. And I already have some new ideas just talking to you. So thank you for inviting me. It's been great.
Oh, good. Have a great night.